committed to fighting this problem. Also, you will hear from a victim of tax fraud and even a former labor broker. So to kick us off, I am so very honored to welcome Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards to speak with us today. Governor Edwards is a true advocate of fighting tax fraud and has supported efforts on so many levels to protect his citizens from the damages caused by tax fraud. Governor Edwards, thank you for joining us. And Mr. Governor, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks everybody for joining in on this important call. I do think that we got to stop misclassification tax fraud, and it's certainly time to speak out and take action. I do want to take a privilege for just a minute, though, and thank the Carpenters for doing something that I asked them to do this past September, and it has made a profound difference in the life of the nation's oldest World War II veteran, Lawrence Brooks. He's 111 years old in September. I called him to wish him happy birthday. He lives in New Orleans, and I asked him if there was anything I could do for him. He said his roof leaked, and he wanted me to help him. I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I called Gary Warren and the Carpenters. And in early October, at least 10 carpenters showed up and did the work over several days, spent thousands of dollars, and did a lot more than just fix a leaky roof. I mean, they did structural repairs. And so I just want to thank you, Jason, and also Gary and everybody who did that work. Incidentally, Mr. Brooks is so old. He was actually 9 years old when we went through the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. He remembered having to wear masks back then. So anyway, I wanted to start off and thank you all for that. But with respect to tax fraud, as you all know, this practice adversely impacts businesses, but also taxpayers and workers. And I suspect that in a complex world, some of the misclassification may be unintended, but I am certain that many businesses purposely engage in misclassification as a way to drive down costs, gain an unfair competitive advantage over their competitors as they're bidding on business, but also in a way that I believe harms their workers. I say workers because they should be employees, but they're going to call them contractors. And when they do that, they're not providing health insurance or maintaining unemployment insurance coverage. They may not even be following all the appropriate safety and regulatory standards, because if they're not going to do this part of their business correctly in accordance with the law, why would we think they're going to do the other parts? And that could have easily been at play and at least partially responsible for the catastrophic failure that we saw in New Orleans back in 2019 at the Hard Rock casino or hotel, I should say, in New Orleans. And by the way, that was election day, and I'm glad we didn't have two catastrophic failures on that day. I was reelected, but they don't pay employment taxes or comply with a host of other standards such as overtime rules, minimum wage provisions, and so forth. I will tell you, our agencies in Louisiana have worked collaboratively, I should say, over the last several years to identify these business owners, to recover evaded taxes, to increase compliance, voluntary, where we can, so that we create a more level playing field. But we know there's a lot of work left to be done. We actually thought we were going to take some more steps in this direction last year in the legislative session, but because of COVID, we lost about half the session. We didn't, and so we greatly restricted the bills that actually went through to final passage because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But one of the bills that did reach passage last year was a bill to create the Employee Misclassification Task Force. Senator Jay Luno, a great friend of ours collectively, he introduced that legislation. And so we've had this task force working to evaluate our current laws and programs, to look at what other states are doing, and to make recommendations to the legislature before the session that just started on Monday of this week, the 2021 regular legislative session. It's a 2-month session with a fiscal emphasis, but this will be one of the bills that will certainly, or one of the subject matters that will be taken up during this session, I should say. The task force recommended certain things: the development of an educational outreach program by the Louisiana Department of Revenue and the Louisiana Workforce Commission for employers, employees, independent contractors related to the proper classification of workers. And the agencies will be moving forward with that recommendation. Legislation isn't required. But they're also recommending that we require employers to submit copies of the IRS forms 1099 to the Department of Revenue, so that we can check on those. Recreate the task force so that it doesn't sunset and it continue to exist, to do additional review and consider the adoption of maybe a standard definition of an independent contractor, revisions to Louisiana penalties for misclassification, adoption of one or more programs to provide relief for voluntary reclassification and disclosure. And there is proposed legislation in this session that comes out of that task force's work. Senate Bill 81, again by Senator Luno, would require employers to file copies of the 1099-NEC issued to independent contractors in Louisiana with the Louisiana Department of Revenue. Again, that is on recommendation of the task force as part of the work that they did over the past number of months. Another bill, House Bill 151 by Representative Neil Reiser, would increase the administrative penalties for misclassification under the unemployment insurance law. And then another Senate bill by Senator Luno, 92, defines employee, revises the withholding statutes relative to misclassification, increases the penalties for failing to file certain reports with LDR, and imposes a specific penalty on employers who fail to file due to misclassification. I think one of the things that you may hear from Secretary Ava Dajwa shortly from the Louisiana Workforce Commission is that currently present law doesn't allow us to impose a penalty the first time we catch an employer engaging in misclassification. And what I think they know that they can do this until they get caught. So I think some of the bad actors feel emboldened by this, and they do this with impunity, at least until they're caught the first time, because they're sort of holding a get out of jail free card, if you will. That's one of the things that we're going to have to address, and I think we can find a way to distinguish between those who are inadvertently misclassifying workers and those who are egregiously doing so, and make sure that in the first instance that the egregious violators can be fined the first time. I think that would really curb the practice, and that's one of the things that I'm interested in getting accomplished. So in conclusion, I want to let you know I support your efforts to combat tax fraud and to create penalties in the law for state agencies to use that are significant enough to create a deterrent to help curb this behavior. And everybody wins when we do that. The only losers are the bad actors. It isn't the people working for them. It certainly isn't the state. It's not other entities that are put at an unfair advantage or disadvantage, I should say, when they try to bid for work. So what you're talking about is important, and I know this is something you've been engaged in for a long time. So I want to thank you all at the Carpenters for your leadership. And I again want to thank the Baton Rouge and New Orleans chapters of the South Carpenters Regional Council for the work that you did for Mr. Lawrence Brooks. I was able to visit with him a couple weeks after you completed his roof, and I don't know if you remember this. We actually had a hurricane that came in and hit the New Orleans area where he lived, and he was very relieved that he had that new roof over his head. That he shares with his daughter, by the way, who is in her 80s, But anyway, thank y'all so much for leadership on this issue and everything that you do to make our state and to make our country better. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Governor. Appreciate your words and especially recognizing us for the work on Mr. Brooks' home, and certainly appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today and for your continued support. So thank you again, Governor.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, so today you will see proof of how construction tax fraud is an assault on the local, state, and even federal economy. Millions are stolen every day from public tax rolls. As a result, we all pay higher taxes to cover the shortfall that tax fraud creates in funding schools, infrastructure, senior services, first responder programs, and more. From a human rights perspective, construction tax fraud is accomplished through misclassification of workers, which abuses workers by denying them overtime wages, unemployment protections, and workers' compensation. It also promotes unsafe job sites and poorly constructed projects, which threatens end users, including the public. And to show you the devastating effects already caused by tax fraud, I welcome Gary Warren, Political Director for the Central South Carpenters. But before Gary begins, one housekeeping note. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll do our best to answer those questions at the conclusion of the program. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent to each of the participants following the event. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Gary Warren.
Good morning. Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here today and to be with all of you. Could you start my PowerPoint for me? Tax fraud, let's stop it. Next slide. About construction industry tax fraud. Construction industry tax fraud is the intentional misclassification of employees as independent contractors. Often it involves paying employees unreported compensation either by check or cash. Tax fraud is a part of the underground economy. These illegal actions are specifically kept hidden from the purview of government regulators and data collectors. Next slide. Today, we are going to highlight the destructive effects of construction industry tax fraud. Next slide. Construction industry tax fraud is accompanied by wage theft, workers' compensation, insurance premium fraud, money laundering, grand theft, forgery, mail and wire fraud, and racketeering. Next slide. Construction industry tax fraud occurs on both public and private projects. Next slide. Task force studies were performed in several states listed below and revealed the lost revenue to public coffers and other businesses. Next slide. A study performed by the University of Texas and Workers' Defense found that 41% of all construction workers in Texas were misclassified and paid off the books, costing $54.5 million in unemployment insurance taxes and over $1 billion in federal income taxes. Next slide. In 2020, a national study of fraud in the construction industry determined that $3.48 billion of federal employment taxes that should have been paid by construction employers was offloaded onto their misclassified workers. Next slide. In the same study, it was calculated by the authors using yearly wages of $35,000 for 1.3 million construction workers, that a total of $8.4 billion was lost to unemployment insurance, federal and state tax losses. And this doesn't include the workers' compensation premiums. Next slide. Contractors who intentionally cheat have on average a 30% lower cost advantage when bidding work. This creates an uneven playing field for the contractors that abide by the law. Contractors who cheat typically use labor brokers to supply and man their work and act as a plausible layer of deniability to upper tier contractors. Labor brokers often commit fraud, and it is workers who are cheated out of the wages, overtime pay, unemployment benefits, workers' compensation, Social Security, and Medicare. Medicaid programs pay billions of dollars for uncompensated care, which includes care for misclassified workers injured on the job. Next, you will see the video testimony of a labor broker. Please play the video.
I was a broker for quite a while, better part of 15 years, maybe close to 20. Yes, I worked on both. I did a lot of hotels, hospitals, universities, public schools, public, private universities. I did a lot of military work on barracks, building um, just about anything on a military base, anywhere from Fort Hood, Killeen, all the way to I can't even remember the name of most of the bases, but Louisiana, Texas Tech, Texas State, um, just about just about everywhere. Um, so my very first job was just about 90 guys, and that was in San Antonio. Peak number of guys is probably well over 1,000. I basically made anywhere from $1 to $8 an average on a guy, um, from my rate to his pay rate. So, do the math. Anywhere from, 90 guys. Sometimes it got less, but 90 guys to over 1,000 guys. It was quite a bit of money made. I gave each individual the choice of wanting to be a 1099 employee or not employee, contractor, or a W-2 employee. Um, their reason for choosing what they wanted was not a question that I asked. So as far as avoiding child support, possibly avoiding paying, um, you know, back taxes or whatever, they might have their wages garnished. I don't know about that, but I did know and hear of a lot of labor brokers that did not pay overtime, that took advantage of their guys, that were charging high dollar rates and paying these guys, low rates and wages, and not taking care of them. I was not that guy, but yes, I was aware of a lot of things that were going on, and I don't think there is any labor broker now or even then that pays time and a half. As far as taking out taxes, we all know the struggle and the fight for 1099 has been going on for a long time. And being in the labor business for such a long time and knowing the need for manpower, it's going to be a struggle and it's going to be a fight to do away with that, and to do away with labor brokers. They're about themselves, not about the worker.
Thank you for that Thank you for that revealing and informational video from the labor broker. Below you will see the structure of the construction industry that is built on subcontracting of the owner, the general contractor or the construction manager, and the specialty subcontractors. Next slide. Complex fraud schemes. It involves shell companies, money service businesses, insurance brokers, accountants, drug cartels, and organized crime. Next slide. In this diagram below, you see a complex fraud scheme. It involves insurance agents, accountants, labor brokers, facilitators, check cashing stores, all who knowingly participate in this orchestrated fraud to cheat workers and government out of money owed. Next slide. Who loses? Federal, state, and local governments lose tax revenue. Law-abiding employers lose work. Honest contractors lose. Workers' compensation, insurers lose premiums. Parents are cheated out of child support. Schools lost subsidies that should have been supplied by public tax rolls. Workers are cheated out of wages, overtime pay, unemployment benefits, workers' compensation, Social Security, and Medicare. Next, you will see a video testimony of a worker who is a victim of tax fraud. Please play the video.
No pay overtime.
Pepe's boss pays him a flat rate. This year, he earns about $380 a week. And did you work an average of 50 hours a week?
Yeah, era 53, 56 horas.
53.
6.5 months, you made $10,000?
Yes, and the time when he was working with the subcontractors is how much he was being paid.
Pepe is an American citizen. You can find this story on most job sites in this country.
Mi seguro social quedó con miedo no dárselo.
Yeah, he was angry.
Angry because every week Pepe loses out on money he's earned. He shouldn't be receiving that flat rate of pay.
You get a check? Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. They take taxes or no? No taxes? 1099?
Yeah, because I have to pay at the end of the year.
Do you? Yeah, okay. So it's a check, but no taxes?
Yeah.
You guys get overtime too?
No. Like we work overtime, but we don't get paid the overtime. We just.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it makes sense.
No, it does, man. That's how the labor brokers do it pretty much. It makes them a lot of money.
Thank you. That concludes the first part of this presentation. Back to you, Jason.
Thank you, Gary. Great information, buddy. Our next speaker, Ava Dejois, battles tax fraud every day as Secretary and Executive Director of the Louisiana Workforce Commission. Louisiana loses more than $200 million every year to tax fraud. Under Secretary Dejois' leadership, the commission operates the Government Against Misclassified Employees Operational Network, or known as Game On, to catch tax fraud criminals. The Central South Carpenters works closely with the Game On program. Just one example of Game On's success is helping to catch a labor broker, Manuel Reyes, who was indicted for stealing hundreds of thousands of construction-related tax dollars in Louisiana. We are proud to welcome Executive Director Ava Dejois. Madam Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Gary, for having me. And I'd like to thank all of the carpenters out there that have been just instrumental in making sure that Louisiana and our nation have the workforce we need, the folks we need trained, and operating job sites correctly. I had the great fortune to visit with your president, Douglas McCarron, in Las Vegas at a Sisters in the Brotherhood event, where female carpenters from all across this nation and really internationally were gathered to receive additional training. And I was struck by that just thinking and driving during the rain this morning. on a day like today, when we hear in the news that unfortunately there's some workers, some Louisiana workers missing in the Gulf of Mexico right now. And before beginning my remarks, I'd like to just take a moment of silence to pray for those workers, their families, that they're found, that the Coast Guard that's trying to rescue them and continuing search efforts remain safe. Thanks so much. We will continue to keep those workers and their families in our prayers, I know. That issue I know is near and dear to all of us. As the governor mentioned, we saw when unsafe conditions lead to tragedies like those in the Hard Rock Hotel in New Orleans. But we also see it in other industries as well. And what has become one of my favorite quotes from Theodore Roosevelt in 1906, before the great tragedy of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire that brought us modern day workers' comp, he talked about the responsibility of businesses and what it meant to be a good citizen. And I'd like to just share that with you. I think it's so poignant because it really, I think, is something that is appropriate for the times that we live in now as well. He said that in spite of all precautions exercised by employers, there are unavoidable accidents and even deaths involved in nearly every line of business. This inevitable sacrifice of life may be reduced to a minimum, but it cannot be completely eliminated. It is a great social injustice to compel the employee or worker, or rather the family of the killed or disabled victim, to bear this entire burden of such inevitable sacrifice. He went on to talk about the responsibility of businesses and a capitalist society that certainly in making a profit, protecting their workers was part of that. And that was before the grand bargain of workers' comp and before the 1936 Social Security Act that brought us, of course, unemployment. But I think all of those things are so timely right now, given the fact that without unemployment insurance and proper classification of employees, individuals are not eligible for unemployment benefits under normal circumstances. It's only through CARES that 1099s and gig workers are even eligible for unemployment insurance. But workers that are misclassified are not eligible for unemployment insurance. Of course, they're not covered by workers' comp. And having attended a Sisters in the Brotherhood event and being an African-American woman myself, whose grandmother was a domestic for a period of time, how many people were deprived of Social Security and benefits and healthcare because employers had not paid in. And the problems have only become worse, more egregious, and even commonplace. It's unfortunate when workers are told that they can make more money being a 1099. And yes, you make more money perhaps in your initial paycheck being a 1099, but you are not provided for with Social Security. You are not covered with workers' comp. You are not covered with unemployment insurance. And currently, it's not up to an employer or an employee, really, or a worker, to in fact determine whether they're an employee or not. That sole statutory authority in Louisiana rests with the Louisiana Workforce Commission. So it is not a decision that an individual business or an individual can make. We, as Jason mentioned, started Game On, and I'm so proud of the team, our UI team and workers' comp team that launched Game On back in 2018. We have a hotline to report misclassification of workers and a mandate by USDOL to investigate 1% of all companies here. We've gone above and beyond that, but still there's so much to do. It's of course one of those challenges before the pandemic where there was not a state appropriation to support unemployment insurance. The system, we're federally funded through unemployment insurance. So that 1% mandate came out of our base grant. And that is one of the things that we hope to receive additional state funding for, to beef up our organized crime unit, as it really is an organized crime unit, to combat fraud. Right now, our workers' comp unit and our UI units do go out. We do site inspections where we can obtain company records, and we've been successful at that. Gary quoted some figures, but I think they bear repeating, and I have some of my own. California, UC Davis estimated that in 2009, the cost to taxpayers in one state, in California, for misclassification of workers cost $30 billion to the rest of us, to the rest of the taxpayers. The Property Casualty Insurance Association estimated that in smaller states, the cost might be as much as 600 million. We can't always determine the cost, but when a worker does not have insurance provided by their employer, it falls through all of us through Medicaid and public assistance. So we're all footing the cost of someone else's profit. And to give you an idea of how much it, just in one particular employer, Jason mentioned the Manuel Reyes indictment. That indictment is valued at over $700,000 for that one employer, $700,000. And that's in the premiums, just the premiums that were not paid by that individual. That unfair advantage allows that contractor to outbid other contractors, folks that are doing the right thing, that have trained their workers, that are following OSHA, that are paying into the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, that are carrying the proper comp. He has that unfair advantage, and it's wrong. We're very grateful to the DA here in East Baton Rouge Parish, Hilla Moore, who partnered with the Louisiana Workforce Commission, allowing one of our attorneys to become a special assistant to prosecute this case. And we were very excited about the indictment that we received in that case, and we look forward to full prosecution of that case. We continue with our efforts. Of course, they are somewhat stymied by our current situation in unemployment insurance with paying out benefits because of COVID. But we will continue these efforts. We are continuing these efforts. Our investigation team is going to employers, and actually COVID has produced some leads for us. And that as people filed for unemployment insurance and they thought that they were an employee, later found out they weren't. So instead of getting a maximum state weekly benefit of $247, they were on a federal claim with a maximum weekly benefit of $107. And instead of using the state unemployment insurance trust fund, where employers had paid taxes in for their employees, they're on a federal claim where us federal taxpayers, all of us, are assuming that burden, that cost of doing business, because it's not a burden, it's the cost of doing business, reputable business, that employer did not pay. We continue to investigate those efforts. We realize that this is a serious, serious problem. Hundreds of thousands of workers throughout the country, costing billions of dollars. It is an unfair advantage. It's unfair not only to the workers, but those taxpayers. We hope that we can gain more support in this, particularly in the business community, with those businesses that are doing the right thing, because there are many businesses that are doing the right thing. In closing, my team is always on the lookout for companies breaking the rules and misclassifying workers. Between the LWC's fraud unit and the Game On Task Force, we are making sure that companies in Louisiana pay their fair share. It's only right, it's fair, and it's equitable. I thank you all for all that you do for workers all across this country to rebuild America, to make us stronger, to contribute to our economy. It is a pleasure to be with you all. And for our businesses out there doing the right thing, our door is always open as well. We want to participate in helping you to, as we say at the Workforce Commission, get back to business. So thank you. It's a pleasure to join y'all today.
Great. Thank you so much, Ava. We're really grateful for the amazing work and the success that you've had in fighting tax fraud. And I personally pledge that the Central South Carpenters, will continue to provide your office with leads and proof of labor brokers who are breaking the law in Louisiana, and you can continue to shut them down. So thank you very much. All right, as a quick reminder, use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen should you have any questions. Okay, with us from the insurance sector, Grace Nicholas, a 26-year veteran, senior manager of Texas Mutual Special Investigation Unit. And she is joined by Victoria Rodriguez, the Premium Fraud Unit Supervisor for Texas Mutual Insurance Company, and has led investigations for 16 years. Both pursue employers and insurance agents who manipulate the workers' compensation system to lower premiums, which is a direct benefit for criminals who commit tax fraud. Grace and Victoria have prepared a pre-recorded video for us, so video, please.
Hi, I'm Grace Nicholas, and as stated, I'm the Senior Manager of the Special Investigations Department at Texas Mutual Insurance Company. For those that may not be familiar with Texas Mutual, we are an insurance carrier that just writes workers' compensation in the state of Texas. The Special Investigations Department investigates all types of fraud and abuse, but one of those is premium fraud. Premium fraud happens when a policyholder intentionally misrepresents their risk or exposure in order to obtain a lower premium. And this can be done any number of ways. They can hide payroll, they can pay workers in cash, they can misrepresent the type of work that's being performed, or they can say that contract laborers are independent subcontractors when they really aren't independent. So as you can see, payroll tax fraud and premium fraud pretty much go hand in hand. And you may be asking yourself, why would a business even bother with getting a workers' compensation policy if they don't want to pay the proper or correct premium? Because after all, workers' compensation is not required in Texas. Well, typically it's because they need a certificate of insurance. Certificates of insurance are often required to bid jobs and be awarded jobs. A common misconception is that a workers' compensation carrier can just simply deny a claim if a policyholder hasn't disclosed all of their employees or all of their payroll. This is wrong. A workers' compensation policy is designed to protect the policyholder and the injured workers, to take care of those injured workers when they're hurt. So an injured worker should not be denied benefits just because their employer has been dishonest in their dealings with a workers' compensation carrier. I think we could probably all agree on that. Texas Mutual's partnership with the Central South Carpenters Regional Council began several years ago when we heard about their efforts to combat payroll tax fraud. Payroll tax fraud not only hurts workers' compensation carriers, it hurts hardworking employees and honest businesses that are just trying to compete. Through our combined efforts, we hope to bring awareness and ultimately combat payroll tax fraud. I'm going to now turn the presentation over to Victoria Rodriguez so that she can share with you more about premium fraud in the workers' compensation system. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Victoria Rodriguez, and I supervise Texas Mutual's premium fraud unit. In the last 3 years, Texas Mutual identified $22.6 million in premium fraud and abuse. As Grace mentioned, honest policyholders that correctly report payroll exposures have trouble bidding jobs competitively because workers' compensation premiums are figured into the cost of the job. When a competitor cheats the workers' compensation system, specifically by unlawfully saving on accurate premium, they gain an unfair advantage in the bidding process. Also, when the proper payrolls are not reported against the losses for workers' compensation classification codes, rates go up and honest policyholders end up paying more for coverage. Obtaining a workers' compensation policy through misrepresentation is a crime. The cases are typically prosecuted by a district attorney's office under insurance fraud or securing execution of a document by deception. In the last 3 years, there have been 14 indictments and 4 convictions related to Texas Mutual policyholders committing premium fraud. If you suspect a construction business is committing tax fraud and premium fraud, please report it. Since you may not know the workers' compensation carrier that writes the coverage, you can report it directly to the Central South Carpenters Regional Council and to the Texas Department of Insurance Division of Workers' Compensation, as shown in this slide. If Texas Mutual is the carrier, the Central South Carpenters Regional Council will partner with us to investigate the matter further. Thanks so much for your time today.
Excellent information, and we certainly thank Victoria and Grace for their relationship and comments. They will both remain in the meeting for any questions that you may have for them. Okay, our next speaker is Jackie Wood, Director of the Public Integrity and Complex Crimes Division at the Travis County District Attorney's Office. Jackie is directly on the front lines in fighting tax fraud, wage theft, and worker misclassification. She is considered one of the most effective prosecutors for the DA's office, and we are honored to hear from her today. Jackie?
Thank you, Jason, and it is a pleasure to be here learning from others who are dedicated to this important endeavor, and also sharing some of the things that we are focusing on in Travis County. I am new to this new administration in Travis County under our newly elected official, Jose Garza. Mr. Garza is very dedicated to the investigation and prosecution of wage theft, workers' compensation fraud, and serious injuries excuse me, stemming from grossly unsafe work environments and practices. Mr. Garza wants to focus on the victims of these crimes, workers who are oftentimes among our most vulnerable citizens in Travis County. These are hard workers who are struggling to provide for their families and yet fall prey to unscrupulous actions of employers and labor brokers who take advantage of their need to make a living. We are very excited in Travis County to have just been awarded a grant from the Public Rights Project to fund a full-time prosecutor that will just be focusing on these types of crimes. That prosecutor will help build relationships with community members like those in attendance today. And we are hoping that these relationships will help build trust with victims who may be reluctant to come forward and work with law enforcement or prosecutors' offices. Under the current Texas Penal Code, wage theft can be prosecuted as theft of service. So employers who don't pay their employees either all or part of the wages that they are entitled to can be subject to prosecution under either a misdemeanor or a felony theft prosecution. Another form of wage theft is not paying the legally mandated time and a half overtime premium for workers who work in excess of 40 hours a week. Employers who have a pattern or stealing from multiple workers under the same scheme could have those cases aggravated, which would make it more likely that it would be a felony that would come to the district attorney's office in Travis County. And also, depending on the employer's scheme, these crimes can be prosecuted under the theory of securing an execution of a document by deception, which you've also heard from Grace and Victoria under the workers' compensation theme. In certain cases, though, if a person with the intent to harm or defraud another person by deception causes another person to execute a document which affects either property or service or the pecuniary interest of any person, that could be securing an execution of a document by deception. So for instance, if an employer has a worker sign a contract or a document that identifies the worker as an independent contractor, when in fact that worker is an employee, the person or company could be prosecuted under the theory of securing a document by deception. I know Grace and Victoria have also already covered the workers' compensation, but we do have within my division a unit that focuses just on those types of crimes. So we are very dedicated to working with Texas Mutual in prosecuting those kinds of crimes as well. We are working to increase the prosecution and investigation of these crimes, and I encourage anyone who knows of any unscrupulous behavior in Travis County to please reach out and contact us. We are very interested in speaking with victims and honest employers who are also being ripped off by these schemes. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you this morning. And I look forward to hearing any questions that you have or in any ways that we can help get this under control in Travis County.
Great. Thank you, Jackie, very much. I mean, without your office's, commitment to prosecute these criminals, all of this effort to uncover the infractions would be for nothing. So we all thank you for your diligence to preserve justice. All right, our final speaker today is Austin City Councilwoman Ann Kitchen. Ann plays a critical role in promoting anti-tax fraud legislation, which is currently under consideration by the City Council. She is also the former Assistant Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division and holds multiple legal and advisory leadership positions in the Texas Health and Human Services sectors. We are honored to have her here join us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason, for inviting me. I want to thank the Central South Carpenters Regional Council for the work that they do, the work that you do in fighting for workers. So, from Austin's perspective, what is tax fraud? Tax fraud is a human rights issue. Construction workers, all workers, have the right to be paid and to be paid fairly for the work that they do. So, fundamentally, tax fraud is worker abuse, including the loss of rights and robbing workers of overtime wages, unemployment benefits, workers' compensation protection, as well as access to Social Security as they get older, as our previous speakers have pointed out. I want to talk about this from the perspective of cities. What is the economic impact on cities? When construction workers, any workers, can't earn a living to take care of their families and prosper, everyone in our communities suffer. When people have to struggle to get paid for what they already worked long hours to earn, everyone in our communities suffer. Families are less able to weather emergencies, as we have been seeing with COVID and the recent winter storm. They can't get ahead, they can't afford to own homes, they struggle to pay property taxes, can't contribute to our economy, our local city economy, and they don't have time to participate in their kids, their family, or community activities. We all know this, and we really see this at the city level. For Austin, one issue alone to think about is how hard it is becoming to pay rent, to buy a home, to pay property taxes, as our growing city gentrifies and pushes people farther from jobs or basic amenities like grocery stores. The necessity and the cost to cities of providing rental assistance, affordable housing, food assistance, and basic needs has never been more apparent. Good paying jobs are fundamental to a community's resilience, and tax fraud contributes to endangering family and community stability. We know that losses from tax fraud also translate into higher taxes for law-abiding citizens to make up for the shortfall in the cost of critical services. For example, law-abiding contractors pick up the slack and pay higher insurance premiums. There's higher cost of public health services when more people seeking services are uninsured. We also know that tax fraud promotes unsafe job sites and poorly constructed projects, which threatens our community. So what can we do? What can cities do about this? It is important that we remember that all stakeholders, including cities, must work together to curb tax fraud. It's a matter of fair competition, and cities have a responsibility to protect tax-paying, law-abiding citizens so they have a fair shot at prosperous work. In Austin, the city of Austin has made a commitment to Austin workers and taken steps to align our policies with our values as a city. Our strategic policy direction commits Austin to increasing economic opportunities and affordable choices so all Austinites can thrive. In Austin, we've also taken steps to require compliance with things like living wages, benefits like healthcare coverage, and workers' protections. But there is more that our city, that Austin and other cities can and must do. Cities can establish more comprehensive worker protections and address tax fraud. That includes protections like against discrimination, wage theft, and that includes wages and overtime. Protections against non-payment of employment taxes and unemployment insurance, and compliance with workers' compensation coverage, classification as employees, and workplace safety. Minimum wage levels, healthcare coverage, paid sick leave, all of that is very important. So I just want to emphasize that worker protections are fundamental. They're not add-ons, and they must be contractually enforceable, and they must extend to subcontractors. Law-abiding contractors should not be disadvantaged by those who commit tax fraud. So in Austin and in other cities, we must update our municipal laws and our contracting and our permitting practices and contracts to address new complex marketplace abuses with a focus on abuses in the construction industry. And we must be able to investigate complaints and pursue compliance and enforcement to make these requirements real and to give all workers in Austin a fair shot at jobs that provide the opportunity to prosper. I am excited to continue our work with the building trade unions and the broader construction industry to ensure that our worker protections in Austin and in all cities for construction projects are comprehensive and to do everything that we can to bolster enforcement. I look forward to our continued work together to stop tax fraud. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. So thank you for having me, Jason.
Hey, you're welcome. Thank you, Ann, and thank you for your work to help fight tax fraud. Okay, I'd like to quickly call Gary Warren back to give us some more information about what can be done to fight tax fraud at all levels. Gary?
Hi, thank you, Jason, and thank all the presenters ahead of me. Please start my PowerPoint. Thank you. Our goals in combating tax fraud are to create better public policy standards, gain compliance through education, awareness, and enforcement, and working with elected officials, state and federal agencies, developers, and contractors, and to increase penalties for misclassification. Next slide. Mario Aguirre was the owner of Escapade Acoustic Drywall and was convicted by the Louisiana Attorney General of committing tax fraud and had to pay $200,000 in restitution to the state, which includes $100,000 to the Louisiana Workforce Commission, $95,000 to the Louisiana Department of Revenue, and $5,000 to the Louisiana Department of Justice. Mr. Aguirre reported that he had 35 employees with a payroll of $145,000, when in fact, over a 9-month period, he had 300 employees with a payroll of about $4.2 million. Next slide. The U.S. Department of Labor recovered $203,000 in back wages for 224 misclassified drywall installers from Escapade Acoustic Drywall and the subcontractor Lloyd N. Morrow. The investigation conducted by the Wage and Hour Division, New Orleans office, determined that there was a joint employer relationship between Escapade and Morrow. Next slide. As mentioned earlier by Ms. Dejoie and Mr. Ingalls, Mr. Reyes, who was recently indicted, had 500 misclassified workers. I think we all know that that is not unintentional. Next slide. We need greater accountability through clearer policy standards, education, and enforcement. We need to discourage the use of labor brokers. We need transparency and disclosure in bid awards. Next slide. Next, please. 71% of voters would support holding the client or the upper tier company liable for subcontractors' unpaid wages, unemployment insurance contributions, workers' compensation, and Social Security taxes. Next slide. The remedies to resolve tax fraud must serve as a deterrent to increased number and frequency of audits, information sharing and collaboration between agencies, increase education, but assess penalties for failure to comply. Penalties must include disqualification and disbarment from state contracting. They must be significant to create a deterrent to curb this action. Next slide. Well, that concludes this part of my presentation. Thank you. Back to Jason.
Great, thank you, Gary. So I'd like to get some participant feedback if I could. We have 2 quick poll questions that will appear on your screen. So let's pull up the first question, please. Were you surprised to learn about the far-reaching, damaging effects of tax fraud in this webinar? We'll give everyone 10 or 15 seconds to respond. Results are coming in. Okay, great. There was a lot of good information. Apparently, 61% were surprised by some of the information that we went over. So let's bring up the second question, please. Will you make a personal commitment to help us fight tax fraud? We'll give it a few seconds. Wow, overwhelmingly, almost 100% support. So we certainly appreciate your responses there. Well, look, we are right on the hour. So let me close by saying this. The tax fraud is a lucrative business for criminals, and they're making millions, the same millions that should be in our government bank accounts. And they're hurting good people by making them work under terrible conditions. So I hope we've demonstrated to you how important it is for all of us to join together and fight back. Stay informed about tax fraud through the stoptaxfraud.net website and social media channels. And most importantly, be the person who ignites change. If you see something, say something. If you know of someone who's being paid off the books or who is paying their workers under the table, contact us and we'll put you in contact with the right people that can take the information and get results. Now, at this time, we'd like to answer some questions that were submitted during the program, but if you must jump off the call, we thank you very much for your time and urge you to go to stoptaxfraud.net to learn more. So one of the questions that came in was from Miss Ava Dejois. This one was directed at you, and the question reads, do you see more end users or developers or general contractors being held liable for the actions of labor brokers or subcontractors as it relates to their involvement in committing tax fraud?
I can't say definitively that it's one group more than the other, or, it would depend on if we're talking about comp or UI or that sort of thing, which one in particular. I think it runs the gamut, really. You see it in every aspect of the construction business. I think toughening up the rules, as the governor said, eliminating that first time warning will be critical, because then we don't have to go back out again. And it's very difficult with all that we have going on. We've paid out nearly $9 billion in unemployment insurance this last year this time. So to say our cup runs over is the understatement of the century, I believe. But I think that we definitely were, prior to COVID, going to the legislature to, of course, you all have been doing it for years as well, to talk about eliminating that first time warning, but also us beefing up our staff. Because again, the 1% that we're mandated to do from USDOL, from the unemployment insurance side, is funded out of our UI-based grant. And our UI-based grant has gone down continually every year. So that, and it's just the level of staff, the sophistication of those that are committing the fraud. I saw one of the questions in the box about what about when someone starts right over again under a new name? You know, well, then that means a new warning. We have to start all over again and prove our case, and that takes staff time and going through those records and that sort of thing. So again, the more resources we can have solely devoted to this effort, and the more serious we get about this effort. And you know, my greatest fear is now with the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund bankrupt and the possibility of wage taxes going up, that more employers might be incentivized to misclassify. So tough legislation is more important now than ever.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Secretary Dejoie. We have a question for City Councilwoman Ms. Ann Kitchen. Does the City of Austin examine bids to ensure they are reasonable, meaning paying taxes and workers' comp accurately?
Well, we do have requirements. The extent to which we are examining compliance with those requirements is something I think it's time to talk to our staff about and make sure that we're doing everything possible to do that.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you. So it looks like we have a question for any of the guest speakers. Can the guest speakers speak about the need for upper tier contractors who use labor brokers to face accountability and the law and facts allow to stop the abuse? Does somebody want to take that? Grace?
Well, I'll just chime in a little bit. And I think we alluded to it earlier about in Louisiana, you know, that kind of slap on the hand the first time, and there's really no consequence. And I think it all boils down to the fact that there needs to be consequences when someone uses labor brokers in order to cheat the system. Otherwise, you know, we're not going to be able to put a stop to it.
Right, right. Well, thank you very much. Well, look, I just want to thank everybody, all the participants, all the panelists who participated today. I know we're running over our hour. So I just want to remind you to visit stoptaxfraud.net and all the social media channels. And again, thank you for the work you are all doing and for partnering and taking the time to be with us today. So have a great rest of the day and rest of the week. Thank you.